the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today I'm hopping across a small little channel here from Olympia all the way to Vashon Island. It's just a bit north of here, with my friend and colleague Erica Jones. Erica, welcome.
Hi, Jen. It's good to be Within Orb.
So good to have you. So good to have you. So we were reflecting, I think we met about 11 years ago at the Queer Astrology Conference in San Francisco.
Yeah, that was at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and had a couple of instantiations after that, and produced a book and did a book. It did all kinds of great things, including bringing me together with some awesome astrologers like you. Very grateful for that.
That was quite a groundbreaking conference, I think, for the community, galvanizing a movement of younger astrologers to become aware of each other and seal friendships up. And hopefully we'll have more in-person events like that.
Yeah, I hope it continues.
Totally. So what was your first astrology book?
That would be Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. I actually met that in a college course at Antioch University, Seattle in 2006. It was right after it was published. And the course was on psychology and spirituality. And we were only assigned to read the first 50 pages of it. But I decided I'm going to do the other 550 pages or whatever it is, and my life totally changed.
Wow.
That whole class kind of cracked me open, but that book was so important and is why I'm speaking to you now. So.
Oh my gosh, wow. And what was it about encountering Cosmos and Psyche that changed you so deeply?
Well, I think it was opening up to the numinous, the spiritual dimensions of life. I think just the nature of spirituality, of psychology, the intertwining of those things, the hint of the metaphysical, which is so missing from mainstream culture. I had been very cut off from that part of myself for a very long time. And so it was this sort of awakening to seeing the world in that way for the first time. And to take it seriously and to have some language for the metaphysical, for the spiritual.
What was your next step then in getting deeper into astrology? Like, did that turn you, you're talking about the numinous, but how did that lead you into astrology proper?
Well, I ended up going to the California Institute of Integral Studies and actually studying with Rick Tarnas. That was the direct line. And I really would credit, though, Antioch University, Seattle, with that sort of trajectory anyway. Because I went in to study more like community organizing and activism and just was opened to, cultural transformation and much, much larger topics that involve worldview and how we language our reality or experience ourselves. And so through that study into these larger realms of spirit, I just ended up going to complete my master's degree at CIIS. And once I wrapped up that degree in 2012, I wanted to branch out. I kind of went as far as I could with the archetypal astrological perspective and really wanted to expand out from there. So it was the United Astrology Conference, honestly, in 2012, where I got to meet so many amazing ways of doing astrology, of thinking about it, of practicing, and then all the amazing people an international community. That was overwhelming.
Yeah.
So many people.
That was quite an epic conference. The elevators at that building when we were in that hotel.
Elevators.
There were all these astrologers trapped in these cryptic elevators that were trying to go up and down, and everybody was stuck on various levels and trying to get to talks and all of this. But Neptune was very present at that conference. I remember Alan Oken saying that he was just impressed with how Neptunian everything was during that time.
Yeah, I remember referring to the elevators as the magic 8 ball, what are you going to get? Because it was overloaded.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I got trapped in a couple very interesting conversations in those elevators.
It's funny because when I'm teaching astrology, I refer to signs as elevators. So if there's a stellium or if there's a planet that's just ingressed into a sign, I'm like, oh, it's in the elevator. And I'm like, oh no, that's what we were in those elevators in New Orleans.
That's a great metaphor.
So actually, why not? Why not stick you in an elevator at UAC 2012? So what would be the 3 books you would take if you got stuck in the elevator back there?
Oh my gosh. Wow, that would be quite an environment.
Yeah, sorry. It's just happening,
Well, I think I would keep Cosmos and Psyche,
Okay.
Rick Tarnas's book, the book that kicked it all off for me.
Wow.
It's a gift that keeps on giving. It's so dense and rich and can stand to be read multiple times. I think especially as one advances in one's practice. I know it's true for me, going back and reading, that book or a similarly sort of deep and thoughtfully organized book can just reveal new insights at the second, third, fourth reading, or going back to sections. I think another thing that's really rich about it is it's not just astrology. I'm a big fan of philosophy, and it's just sort of a tour de force of philosophy in the opening, those first 50 pages. I just think there is so much there to continue to be awe-inspired by our existence. And, I'm going to need awe in an elevator. I'm going to need to be able to summon that, or a desert island, to remain in touch with that sense of belonging to something so much larger and with a great deal of mystery. I deeply appreciate one section of Cosmos and Psyche that is the parable of 2 suitors, and how would the cosmos respond to someone who treated it as an inert lump of material for me to move around at my own whim, which is scientific materialism. I mean, that is the mainstream or overculture kind of view. How would I respond if someone treated me that way? Treated me as this object to be manipulated per their will, versus what if I approach the cosmos as a thing of magic, mystery, wonder, something to be known, something that might disclose something to me, and to have that sort of open heart and to treat with love and respect. How then might I respond? Well, how would the cosmos respond to different ways of trying to know and to be known by the sacred other, let's say? So I think for that reason alone, just that section and staying with that kind of curiosity.
I love that. Wow. And I love also using the word response. I know that's come up in the show before, but it's beautiful to hear you still carry it as well, as just this idea of, instead of like reacting to the world around us, truly having that receptivity to respond, and that careful attention of paying attention to the star stuff in ways that allows us to kind of be contemplative in the way that you carry that.
Right. It's definitely how I approach my practice. Whether I'm offering that to others or teaching anything of that nature, it is this, what is actually happening here? What do I actually not know and could learn in the process while carrying a conceptual framework, right? I mean, you have to start somewhere. You have to have some map, some kind of map for the territory, but the territory is not the map. And that is the continuous process of disclosure, I think, that astrology affords everyone. Is you go out there with that map, and then you watch Uranus or Pluto or Neptune or somebody come along and just blow it up. And, oh, there's more here. There's something I could not have possibly imagined. This is so amazing. I love that thrill of discovery.
Wow. All right. What would your second book be?
I'm going to go to a different end of the spectrum. I'm going to go from sort of Piscean to Virgo and be more of practical. And that would be Astrological Gardening by Louise Riotte. And she's actually a master gardener. One of her books, other books about gardening, is a bestseller, Companion Planting. So she actually has brought this knowledge of one field and then brought in astrology with it. And I think that makes this a real gem. Like, her writings on this make it extremely useful and fruitful. And I think every astrologer could learn from that. And so for the astrological gardening piece, I had imagined myself in a desert island, and now I'm trying to cultivate in an elevator. And so
we can go back to the island. We can take an archetypal portal through Cosmos and Psyche and land into that, proverbial island, as it were.
Yay, we're back on the island. But
yeah.
Well, on a practical level, it is like, how do I work with the cycles of the planets? It's moon planting is really the main thrust of what she's presenting there. And it's a old tradition from European folk sources, but Rudolf Steiner also, people might know him as an anthroposophist and also into his own engagement with astrology, including planting by the moon, biodynamic farming, that sort of thing. So I actually found this book, beyond being able to be very useful and apply it and observe what's happening with respect to the moon cycle and maybe planetary positions as well, like what happens with plants and gardening and cultivation, how to maximize production, let's say, in order to survive. In addition to that, like the reason I actually sought this book out was I went to Kaylee. I went to the library, your library, and was in a search for things to help me write an astrological column that included a section on using astrology to plant, because Vashon Island actually does have still a bit of a semi-rural nature. There's lots of gardeners here, and this column is for a business here called Minglement. And on their website, they're publishing my writing once a month. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to have like an almanac to know when's a good time to plant, when's a good time to actually harvest, and also to eliminate pests. And I went to the library and just picked up, I think, about 7 or 8 different books that could help me.
Yeah, I remember when you made your reservation to show up, and there's always an area where it says, what are you interested in looking at when you're here? And so I went around the stacks and found all of these books that I thought it would be interesting for your field of inquiry of astrological gardening. And sometimes it's the herbals that are helpful in terms of what rules what. And then this text by Louise is just one of those ones that stands out. And I mean, it's very hard to find. It's a very rare book in a way. And so it was cool to be able to have those ready for you for your visit so that you could digest them and kind of work through it. And I'm happy to hear that it's become a column and then even mini almanac for Vashon, which, as you say, my one experience with that is a group of families who cohabitate on a piece of land. And so there's these cluster of mini homes, and then there's this massive field that they all work together. And then they have a kind of communal kitchen. And so there's this humongous space in the middle, but everybody has their satellite tiny house. And so it's going back to a level of communal life that I think is an ideal for a lot of people. And yet it's on this island in the middle of Puget Sound, in the Salish Sea. So there you are.
That's fantastic. Yeah, there are books that I want to go back and dig more into. There's one in particular that you had pulled out, Ernst Michael Kranich's Planetary Influences upon Plants. It's based on Rudolf Steiner. I think of him as the modern day transmitter of Wolfgang Johann Goethe's scientific work. And Goethe is known as a playwright, but he was actually an amazing scientist of his time. Mm-hmm. But his way of seeing has been discarded, unfortunately, except by a handful of people. And it's a way of seeing that I'm very, very interested in going further with.
Yeah, but Goethe did coin the word morphology in his work, in his scientific work. He had this vision of the original plant, this Urpflanze. And if you see it, it's almost this surreal drawing of, there's a root here and a leaf there and a flower here and a fruit there. And it's a very kind of hybrid, strange, concoction of anything potentially plant-like. But he had this vision of there being some kind of originary plant archetype that things unfolded from.
The Metamorphosis of Plants, that's the book where he set that forth. And I love that there is someone who has taken that work and expanded it out to planetary influences upon plants. And I'm actually teaching a course on, or I have taught, it's ongoing, a course on using the heart as an organ of perception to perceive directly, called The Heart of the Moon. I'm starting with the moon because we can actually look at it. I wouldn't recommend staring at the sun in order to gain knowledge. But this is based on Goethe's ideas, and the way that he perceived this Urpflanze or archetypal plant was through a mode of cognition and epistemology, which is just a fancy word for how can we know what we know? What is the extent of our knowledge? And the epistemology that I'm working with is one of the heart, that we can actually have a direct line of communication with the moon, as the moon is where I started. And to me, it's still an unknown. Can we do the planets that we can't see with the naked eye? because those aren't always visible, but it's easy to work with the moon. So I'm very excited to continue to develop that as a way of knowing. And it's like kind of a question that I have. If more ancient peoples actually, because their cognitive faculties, their perceptual faculties were, inarguably, they were organized differently than our modern ones. And if their perceptual capacities actually permitted this sort of knowing the meanings of something, because that's the epistemology I'm working with, is that we can actually directly from a phenomenon, from the moon, know its meanings. But it's a whole process of how to do it, and total conjecture if that's a part of where original meanings of planets came from, because I don't have any way of proving that or knowing that, but it's interesting.
Well, no one does actually, but I will say, I'm wondering if your sources on Goethe talk about the term delicate empiricism. Does that come up at all?
I mean, I know the feeling of it. I know what that means in a sense, because there is this disclosure point that happens. You have to really concentrate, but not force yourself, say like not on the moon, but you have to be open to actually receive. And there's something about our own desire to know. It kind of goes back to Rick's parable of the suitor, Rick Tarnas's parable of the suitor in Cosmos and Psyche. It's that desire to actually know the other from a place of curiosity rather than mastery or domination. And I feel like that's the delicacy.
Yeah.
Right? The delicacy.
That's the word that Goethe uses in German, is delicate empiricism.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a huge concept in translating the Goethean scientific approach, because he's pushing back against some of the lapping Enlightenment waves of what we now think of as hard science empiricism. And he's like, no, we have to soften and we have to be more receptive. And in that way of, what's actually happening immediately right now and now and now, and take those records and add them up. And then that becomes the testimony or the sort of experimental situation of participating in this moment. And like you say, with the moon, leading with the heart as opposed to the mind, but the heart is intelligent as well as the mind, having a different sort of intelligence. And then 100 years later, there were other Germans going back down into the romantics like Goethe and trying to resuscitate some of their work, who talk about this rupture of modernity that separates us from the way of knowing that you're talking about. And so that was also very much in the drinking water in early 20th century Germany.
Cool.
Yeah. So you're doing it. It's happening, you're in it. And it's so cool that Louise, or the idea of planting and planets, and, you have real results. You said Virgo is an archetype in terms of can I grow food? And then it was an interesting, hearing you say, can I maximize it for survival? And I'm like, but nature takes her 10. It's nice to maybe let the animals have some and not think about in what way are we maximizing? Is it a long-term sensitivity to sustainability, or is it a kind of let's get in there with chemicals? I know you're not saying that, but I'm just saying thinking about that idea of optimizing something with plants and planets brings up an interesting inflection point around our concepts of wanting to fight a system of mastery and dominance, and yet also wanting to make the best of the moment,
For sure. Yeah. And when I think about maximizing productivity, it's so that there is enough for the others to eat. It's not just about, I want to hoard and, have all these tomatoes for me, but it's that I would. And Louise is actually an organic gardener because she was born in 1909. This was way before, the chemical onslaught after World War II. So she's bringing already this organic, understanding of cooperation with life. And that's imperative really to have bounty, not just for the human being, but for all the other than humans that we depend on. That's one of the things that I actually went to CIIS to study integral ecology, and how can, from a philosophical perspective, the human relationship to the planet. And I ended up in a cosmic ecology, it just sort of expanded out. And I want to keep all those sensibilities very much interwoven, because it's so important to me, and I think it's an important message for today, a consideration.
Yeah, I know. Now I'm thinking we need to have a book called Astrology for Pollinators.
I love it. Yes.
Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support Kaylee before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the Kaylee Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.kaylee.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support Kaylee into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show. So what would your third book be?
Well, my third book, I think, would be The Astrological Neptune and the Quest for Redemption by Liz Greene. And it's really funny to pick this book because, well, on the plus side, it's not just discursive and didactic, right? It's not just this if-then series of statements or cookbook. It's very evocative. It's got the poetic invocation. It's got stories and myths and can go in this much more analogical sort of thinking. And a book about Neptune must be this. Like, if you're going to do Neptune, you've got to be, able to range out into the poetic, into the non-literal. And I can't say that I agree with her all the time, though, because I feel like, she's a Saturn-Pluto person, and I feel like that kind of seeps in at times when I hear her, some of her takes on Neptune, and I get kind of itchy about it. And I can't say I go all in for psychoanalytic theory all the time, because she has a section on psychoanalytic, and I'm like, well, I don't know that I really agree with it. Because it goes to that map and territory problem, right? Like, you've got a map, but is that really the territory? Can your map accommodate all the dragons that are kind of like swimming in those waters? But it's a work as a work. It is something that she's labored over. This is a very thoughtful compilation of a serious, like, a scholar and a visionary. Like, it's not simply a hot take off the internet, a 2-minute hot take. It's absolutely...
It's not a short.
No, it's something you can argue with. I find value in that. Plus, I love Neptune. I'm really fascinated with the outer planets, which I think is why Richard Tarnas was my first astrological teacher. Not so much that I got that from him, but that is what brought us together. Like, that was why I needed that in some way that I didn't know, but realize now.
I like that your choice of Neptune through Liz Greene is a book of challenge in addition to one of curiosity, because it seems productive if you're going to spend a long time with a book, and it's a big one too, so there's that. But I mean, it seems productive in ways to kind of have a counterpart so that you can push back against, because it's such a hard to define concept anyway. If someone can write about it in ways that irritate you, then you can kind of triangulate yourself in there and see what's Erica's Neptune, what's your interpretation of that astrological factor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Listening to those with whom we don't agree and faithfully repeating what they have said is so important to know that you understand. I think this is why I really had to go outside of archetypal astrology and be in conversation with so many different traditions, and to study with other teachers and look at different methods, because I don't want to be in an echo chamber. And I know that there's so much more out there that can be known through different lenses. It's sort of, I think Neptune's reality is why we can have so many different astrologies, plural, that don't agree with each other on some things and yet still reveal something like incredible, profound, not superficial, but still really profoundly reveal truth. And I would give that to Neptune, the existence of Neptune, that we live in a place like this cosmos is not reducible down to a literal story. It's not a univocal phenomenon where one thing only means one other thing, right? Like a pen is a pen and that's it. That is the fluidity of existence, the metaphor.
Yeah.
The only way that humans can even understand themselves and the world is by analogy. Take, for example, the Big Bang. That is an analogy. It is, the only way I can conceptualize is by imagining something exploding out.
Right.
It's not this dry, factual account. Indeed, all our leaps in understanding come from having a different analogical, like a different context for understanding ourselves. Darwin, that change in understanding. This is profoundly symbolic. And this is one reason I love that dimension of Neptune, and the fact that thanks Neptune, we get to have this place that's not literal. We get to be playful. We get to, be curious about what life is and take different perspectives and try to draw out more understanding. I think even dropping into psychological Neptune, or a psychological perspective, which is one that I favor, I enjoy taking with astrology. It's like James Hillman, who is actually was one of Rick Tarnas's mentors, but I had met Hillman's work before Rick. He is an archetypal psychologist, comes out of depth psychology with Carl Jung, and his phrasing that there are events that happen in our lives, but it's the soul, it's the human soul, it's the individual person who takes that event and creates an experience. That's the process that's happening. And if that is the case, that there isn't just this dry set of facts out here that, is objective reality, if there is a meaningful subjective dimension to being human and what it means to be human, then we have to look for a healing fiction. What is the story? And that's a book that he wrote, Healing Fiction. What is the story that helps us to create meaning and understanding and place ourselves in a story that is of service to life, of service to the good and the true and the beautiful? These are tangible ideals, things that can be lived and not just thought about.
So to what extent does forgetting play a role? Because when we're thinking about, the human soul is going through the world, and then there's this feeling of experience from a certain event, but then there's so many things that happen that we don't remember, that aren't creating those stories for us or becoming a part of that healing fiction, would Neptune also be responsible for the forgetting or the not perceiving?
Yeah, I think so. We do have to filter experience. It would be absolutely overwhelming to not have perceptual filters. Well, 2, memory is imagination. Memory is a part of the imagination.
Mic drop.
So,
whoa, everybody stop driving. Memory is imagination. I love that. Wow.
It's a creative act.
Yeah. And then you overwrite them. Have you ever thought of that? They re-remembering too many times, you kind of begin to actually embellish or revise in ways where it's no.
Absolutely.
Is there a caution against trying to remember too much because you might actually override your hard drive or something?
I resist mechanical metaphors.
Okay. I am not a hard drive.
But, and why not? On the one hand, and why not? Because I could go either way with that. Whether it's good or bad kind of depends on the context. Am I trying to bypass something, to not face a truth that needs to be known in order to really understand what's happening, to make good choices? That kind of repression isn't great. Yeah, I think we could lay the blame at the feet of Neptune in some cases, right? That kind of forgetting, but the re-remembering, being faithful to a memory, this is really it's a profound exploration, because what I've found is that it's not so much about telling the story, embellishing and twisting it, but having a different perspective on what happened.
Oh.
So there is Saturn, what is, right? Yeah. Saturn can be thought of as an oppositional force to Neptune, because it just has this sort of, it's kind of reality principle, the what isness of things. This is what is. But what perspective we take on it. When I think of the things that I have worked with people in client work that they've brought and wanted to discuss, of a challenge or a painful thing that happened in childhood. Well, we're no longer a child when I'm talking to them. They're an adult. So what happens when you look back from the perspective of the adult at the child with profound empathy that this horrible thing happened? The horribleness isn't going away, and you don't want to discard that, because that can lead us into recreating that terrible scenario by trying to forget it that way, to push it away. It's still active and alive, but to turn back and look at that memory and have a different story about it, that's the healing fiction. That's the movement into being able to move forward from and not be trapped in I was only a victim. Yes, I was a victim. Victim's the archetype there. It fits. It's true. It's accurate. Honor that. Love that part of you. Love, like as from the adult perspective, as the adult loving you that went through that. But there's a vast difference from being, only stuck, frankly, in that position of I was just a victim, and being able to turn around and look at that and go, oh, that shouldn't have happened. And I'm no longer in that place. And from that, restoring, being faithful to that memory from a different perspective through the restoring, I have noticed that it's possible to grow leaps and bounds and to understand what one's agency is, to actually make changes, to not enact patterns that might have been laid down when we were young to survive, but to break out of those. And it requires being true to what happened, but also the different perspective.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it'll let you get off the island. So love that. Yeah, no, wow, what a powerful transmission. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So if you were going to introduce someone to the wonderful world of astrology, which books would you point them to?
Well, Aspects in Astrology by Sue Tompkins. I like this book because, for one, the planets, just sticking with the basic significations of the planets, you could have a lifetime of that and still keep learning. Because of the combination, it's incredible. Plus, it's the one thing that across many astrologies, you'll get agreement on. So if you want to start with something that doesn't confuse the hell of you, don't start with houses, my opinion. Like that's because there's just so much debate. You could get mired if you're just starting out, right? You get kind of mired and, well, who to believe? And with planets, it's just, okay, planets. Right. You get a lot of concord there. And Sue's treatment is really, she brings the perspective of a homeopath, trained homeopathic physician. And so like treats like there. And with that understanding, I think I gained so much from working with her book early on, because I think that is also a really challenging part as you're growing as an astrologer, just starting out, is how to combine the planets. And she's very, gives enough of a literalness with enough of the analogical, like the metaphorical, that you can really sink your teeth into it. But from the homeopathic perspective, it's sort of like if you're dealing with Mars-Pluto, you're not going to look to Venus-Neptune to figure out what to do with Mars-Pluto. You have to include Mars-Pluto in the solution. Now, Venus-Neptune could be a part of it, depending on the person, the context, but you can't ignore Mars-Pluto, right? Yeah, so there's this understanding that, okay, this is what I have to work with. What's the evocation, maybe invocation rather than invocation of that archetype, if we're speaking magically. Yeah. We're going for angels here, even with Mars-Pluto, that to bring the divine out of that, you have to work with it. So she brings that perspective that I find valuable, and also the different quality of aspects.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about someone close to me who has Mars-Pluto and and sort of looking at the makeup of, it's very hard in this, just in that example specifically, it's very difficult to be a civilian with a Mars-Pluto configuration. And so my advice was go to sword fighting, go to be in a place where Mars-Pluto is allowed to be, instead of trying to not do it or to somehow ameliorate it. It's like, no, lean into it and give an outlet for that energy so that it gets expressed instead of bottled up and then turns into maybe a less social Mars-Pluto expression.
Yeah. So it's problematic. Dancing. Everybody I know with Mars-Pluto is like, if I dance, I don't get into unnecessary fights. Yeah. Like really physical body, like, feeling the wild spirit.
Or long distance running.
Yeah. Mountain climbing.
Some kind of solo sport where it's like, okay, full speed ahead here.
Totally. Yeah. You can work it.
It can be done. No, that's awesome. I love that sharing. I had no idea that Sue was a trained homeopath, so that's very cool too.
Yeah.
All right. Any other books you would put in the hands of a person just getting into it?
Yeah, I think the combination of stellar influences by our good friend Abertine. Because he goes the next step further. He puts 3 planets together. And I loved in my, just starting to learn of like, well, what does that look like? Because it's so overwhelming. It's so much to take in, even just the planetary significations. And so the way that he does that, the one caution on him, I feel like is, he lived through Was he actually interned in a concentration camp in World War II?
Mm-mm.
Okay, well, I know that he witnessed it. He saw the high delusion of Germany of that period. And I feel like he's sort of a good contemplation on being aware of our bias whenever we're trying to understand archetypes. Because I feel like there's a way that you have to go deep in. You have to really embrace this is, Jupiter is all, if I'm Jupiter, Saturn, Jupiter sucks.
Yeah.
I know so many people with Jupiter, Saturn who just have a poor opinion of Jupiter. That just doesn't go well. You can't just expand like that. You have to suffer. And so, but going all in until you come out the other side to be like, oh, okay, I get the principle of expansion. Not if you expand too fast, you get the smackdown. Because that's Jupiter, Saturn.
Yeah.
But he has a really negative take on Neptune. And I don't blame him for what he lived through, what he saw. But that's not all that Neptune is, which is a lot of my work.
Well, yeah. And, also speaking of Mars and not Pluto, but Saturn, the Mars-Saturn midpoint as delineated in combination of stellar influences is often pointed to as a point of death. And in our current medical climate, it can be an extreme health crisis, but it doesn't need to be death. And so, I think the catastrophe of World War II that's embedded inside of the combination of stellar influences is a byproduct of that catastrophe, actually. Just kind of, that was the drinking water of the time it was made. But it also is a beginning point, like it would be like a springboard, right? If here's the most extreme expression of whatever this is, and it's not always going to be that extreme.
Exactly.
Right. So, and he does say in the beginning, like, this isn't the definitive. This is something to jar your mind and get you thinking and spinning your brain on. And then you come up with your own take and you get your interpretive faculties, juiced up with my words,
Oh, it's great advice and a really good approach, I think. Especially part of the conversation in the queer astrology scene was about how difficult it was for someone who isn't hetero or, cisgendered or in that particular spectrum of being to see themselves in these delineations. Yeah. And then sometimes some prejudice creeping into some of these books and how to read between the lines and like, well, can we expand beyond that? And those books being a product of their times. Well, what does it mean to like carry that forward in a way that is more inclusive of the human experience? Because that's what's up right now.
Right.
Or at least it was in our group. And I think that wave is continuing amongst others.
Yeah, I think that'll be one of our generation's contributions and what's in the, works right now, basically. Hopefully at Kaylee, people can come and update all of those with the right words and the right context and the right kind of drinking water.
Right. Exactly.
Very cool.
Do you have time for me to throw in one more book?
Of course. Yep. What's the last one you'd send someone with?
Astrology, Karma, and Transformation by Stephen Arroyo. I think that it's sort of my obsession with the outer planets continues. It's valuable. I think its treatment of the outer planets and how we might hold and interpret them in a way that promotes health. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they are transpersonal. They're beyond the personal experience. They really don't give a flip about, us little humans. When their actions come through, it can be very, very impersonal and feel very intense. And I feel like his way of holding that and inviting a person to consider when they're, especially counseling, because that's really a lot of the emphasis there is how you counsel others. But when you're handling your own chart as well, to not future trip, to not look at this big transit. Like I'm going through a huge transit right now that I started to future trip on a few years ago. And a friend of mine just like sat me down and was like, do you know you're going to be so different by the time that transit comes around? Like you're going to be a different person. You're going to be okay when this comes. And I talked about my fears and she's like, well, do you secretly want that?
Oh, no.
It's totally punctured my story.
What a good friend. Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm living this transit in a very different way than I was projecting out of fear. Wow. And I feel like he really speaks very much about we shouldn't sugarcoat things, to not overcorrect and be like, oh, we're all in control. This is all great. No, but you can also not flip yourself out or anyone else. You can also like hold the range of possibility and bring in how you can cooperate with it. Cause I'm really big on that in my practice and how I try to, help others. It's just you've got a big influence coming in. There's a lot that's going to happen to you, but there are avenues and ways that you can cooperate with what's happening and say, okay, I see you. I'm going to show up this way. I got to do a lot of Saturn right now. Let's go do Saturn. It's not a time to Neptune out.
Wow. I love it. I love it. So where can people find your practice and your work and what you're up to now?
They can find me at my website, which is Real Imaginal, all one word, RealImaginal, realimaginal.com. And I'm teaching there. I actually have a lecture on Saturn, Neptune coming up later on because that's coming in. I'm looking at it as an archetypal complex and throughout history and understanding it psychologically beyond just this current manifestation of it, which is going to be so interesting the next couple of years. And things like that, like talking about archetypal complexes and then also teaching an epistemology of the heart, of how to perceive the planets with the heart, derive meanings, and also work with that psychologically. And I'm also a counseling astrologer and offer other metaphysical healing arts.
Awesome. 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 Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your wisdom with us. And good growing up there in Vashon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen. I look forward to my next visit to Kaylee. I'm deeply grateful that you're so close by and can visit. And I hope everyone comes and checks it out because it's an amazing resource and support. Totally worth supporting.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library or to become a member, visit our website at caeli.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.